Aladdin from the Arabian Nights. In the capital of one of the richest and most extensive provinces of China lived a poor, hard-working tailor whose name was Mustafa, together with his wife and his only son, Aladdin. When the youth was old enough to learn a trade, his father took him to his shop and began to show him how to use his needle. But no sooner was Mustafa's back turned than Aladdin, who was of an idle and careless disposition, was off and returned no more during the day. His father frequently punished him, but Aladdin did not reform, and with great sorrow Mustafa was obliged at last to abandon him to his idle course, which he continued until his father's death. As Aladdin's mother saw that her son would never follow the trade of his father, she shut up Mustafa's shop and sold off all his stock, while Aladdin gave himself completely to idleness. One day, when he was about 15, as he played with his companions in one of the public places, a stranger who was passing stopped and looked attentively at him. Whether this stranger, who was a powerful magician, thought he saw in the face of Aladdin signs of a disposition well suited to his purpose is uncertain. But he very cleverly obtained information concerning Aladdin's family, and ascertained the sort of character and disposition he possessed, after which he went up to the youngster, and, taking him aside, asked him if his father was not called Mustafa, and whether he was not a tailor by trade. "Yes, sir," replied Aladdin, "but he has been dead a long time." On hearing this, the magician threw his arms round Aladdin's neck and embraced him, while tears ran from his eyes. "Alas!" he exclaimed, "I am your uncle. Your father was my most excellent brother, whom for years I have longed to meet once more. This is, indeed, sad news." He then asked Aladdin where his mother lived, and when Aladdin had informed him, the magician gave him a handful of small money, saying, "My son, go to your mother, make my respects to her, and tell her I will come and see her tomorrow." Aladdin ran to his mother, highly delighted with the money that had been given to him. "Pray tell me, mother," he cried as he entered the house, "whether I have an uncle?" "No, my child," replied she, "you have no uncle, either on your poor father's side or on mine." "For all that," answered the boy, "I have just seen a man who told me he was my father's brother and my uncle. He even wept and embraced me when I told him of my father's death. And to prove that he spoke the truth," added he, showing the money he had received, "see what he has given me. He bade me also be sure and give his kindness greeting to you, and to say that he would come and see you tomorrow." "It is true, indeed, my son," replied Aladdin's mother, "that your father had a brother once, but, to the best of my belief, he has been dead a long time." The next day the magician again accosted Aladdin, while he was playing with 3 other boys, and, putting 2 pieces of gold in his hand, said, "Take this, my boy, to your mother. Tell her I intend to come and sup with her this evening, and that I send this money that she may purchase what is necessary." Aladdin carried home the 2 pieces of gold to his mother, who laid them out to the best advantage. When everything was ready, she desired Aladdin to go out into the street and look for his uncle. But before the boy could obey, there was a knock. Aladdin instantly opened the door and saw the magician, who had several bottles of wine in his hands, to add to the other good things his money had provided. When the magician had paid his respects to Aladdin's mother, he seated himself and observed, "Do not be surprised, my good sister, that you have never seen me during the whole time that you have been married to my late brother, Mustafa. It is full 40 years since I left this country, and since then I have traveled nearly all over the world." He then turned to Aladdin and asked, "What is your occupation? Have you learned any trade?" But his mother answered for him. "Aladdin," she said, "is a very idle boy. His father did all he could to make him learn his business, but could not get him to work. And since his death, Aladdin will learn nothing, but leads an absolutely idle life. Though I pass the whole day in spinning cotton, I can hardly get bread for us to eat." And she burst into tears. "This is not right, Aladdin," said the magician. "Dear nephew, you must think of supporting yourself and working for your bread. If you have any objection to learning a trade, I will procure you a shop and furnish it. You shall sell the goods, and with the profits that you make, you shall buy other merchandise, and in this manner you will pass your life in ease and prosperity. Consult your own inclinations, and tell me candidly what you think of the plan." This offer greatly flattered the vanity of Aladdin. He therefore admitted to the magician that he thought favorably of the suggestion. "Very well," replied the magician, "I will take you tomorrow and have you properly fitted out, and then we will look about for a shop of the description I have named." Aladdin's mother, who till now had not been convinced that the magician was really the brother of her husband, no longer doubted when she heard of the good he proposed to do her son. She thanked him sincerely for his kind intentions, and during the supper charged Aladdin to prove himself worthy of the good fortune in store for him. The magician returned the next morning, according to promise. He took Aladdin to a merchant's where ready-made clothes were sold, and made him try on several suits, saying, "Dear nephew, choose such as please you best." When Aladdin saw himself handsomely dressed for the first time in his life, he overwhelmed his uncle with thanks, while his mother was transported with joy. "Oh, generous relation," she exclaimed, "I thank you from the bottom of my heart. May you live many happy years." "Aladdin," replied the magician, "is not such a bad boy after all. Tomorrow I will call for him, and we will go sightseeing. I have no doubt that we shall make him what we wish." The next morning, Aladdin got up very early in order to be ready to set out on the moment his uncle called for him. Directly he saw the magician coming, he went to inform his mother of the fact. Then he took leave of her and ran to meet his uncle. The magician received Aladdin in the most affectionate manner. "Come," said he with a smile, "I will, today, show you some very fine things." He then led the boy, who had never been outside of the city, out at a gate and showed him some magnificent palaces with beautiful gardens, gradually drawing him on and on until they had left the city far behind. Aladdin, who had never in his life before taken so long a walk, began to feel tired. "Where are we going, my dear uncle?" he asked. "I can see nothing but hills and mountains before us." "Take courage, nephew," replied his pretended uncle. "I wish to show you something that far surpasses in magnificence all you have hitherto seen. At length they came to a narrow valley situated between two mountains of nearly the same height. We need go no further, said the magician. I am now going to strike a light, and do you, in the meantime, collect all the dry sticks and leaves you can find in order to make a fire. Aladdin obeyed, and, as soon as the sticks blazed up, the magician threw upon them a certain perfume. A thick and dense smoke immediately arose. The ground shook slightly, and, opening near the spot where they stood, disclosed a square stone of about 1.5 feet across, with a brass ring fixed in the center. Aladdin, dreadfully alarmed, was about to run away when the magician stopped him. Do not be afraid, he said. I desire nothing of you but that you obey me implicitly. I must now inform you that under the stone which you see here is concealed a great treasure, which is destined for you, and which will one day render you richer than the most powerful monarchs of the earth. But, in order to ensure success, you must observe and execute in every respect the instructions I am going to give you. What must I do? Asked Aladdin, overwhelmed with astonishment at what he had seen and heard. Tell me, I am ready to obey you in everything. I heartily rejoice, replied the magician, that you have made so good a resolution. Come, then, take hold of this ring and lift up the stone. Aladdin did as the magician told him. He raised the stone without any trouble and laid it aside. When the stone was taken away, a hole was visible, at the bottom of which appeared a small door, with steps going still lower. You must now, my boy, said the magician to Aladdin, observe exactly every direction I am going to give you. Go down into this cavern, and when you have come to the bottom of the steps, you will see an open door, which leads into 3 chambers opening out of each other, and which are full of gold and silver. But you must take particular care not to touch any of this treasure. At the end of the 3rd chamber is a door which leads to a garden, planted with beautiful trees, all of which are laden with fruit. Go straight forward and follow a path which you will perceive, and which will bring you to a flight of 50 steps, at the top of which there is a terrace. When you have ascended to the terrace, you will observe a niche before you, in which there is a lighted lamp. Take the lamp, extinguish it, and bring it to me. If you should wish to gather any of the fruit in the garden, you may do so. Then the magician took off a ring which he had on one of his fingers, and put it in Aladdin's hand, telling him that it would guard him against every evil that might happen. Go, added he, and descend boldly. Aladdin jumped into the opening and went down the steps. He found the 3 chambers and passed through them to the garden. Then, without stopping, he ascended to the terrace. He took the lamp which stood lighted in the niche, threw out its contents, and put it in his bosom. On his way back through the garden, he stopped to look more carefully at the fruit, which he had only glanced at before. The fruit of each tree had a separate color. Some were white, others sparkling and transparent. Some were red, others green, blue, or violet, some of a yellowish hue. In short, there were fruits of almost every color. The white were pearls, The sparkling and transparent fruits were diamonds. The deep red were rubies, the green emeralds, the blue turquoises, the violet amethysts, those tinged with yellow, sapphires. All were of the largest size and the most perfect ever seen in the world. But Aladdin thought they were only pieces of colored glass. Yet the variety and contrast of so many beautiful colors, as well as the brilliancy and great size of these fruits, tempted him to gather some of each kind. And he took so many of every color that he filled all his pockets, and stuffed others in his girdle and inside his shirt, until he had no room for more. Laden in this manner, Aladdin made his way back to the entrance of the cave, where the magician was impatiently waiting. As soon as Aladdin perceived him, he called out, "Give me your hand, uncle, to help me up." "My dear boy," replied the magician, "you will do better first to give me the lamp." "It is not at all in my way," said Aladdin. "I will give it to you when I am out of the cave." The magician persisted in demanding the lamp before he would help Aladdin out of the cave, but the latter absolutely refused to give it up till he was out. The magician then fell into the most violent rage. He muttered a spell, made some passes with his hands, and the stone which served to shut up the entrance to the cavern returned of its own accord to its place, the earth covering it exactly as when the magician and Aladdin first arrived. Now the magician, who, of course, was not the uncle of Aladdin, had discovered by his magic that there was a wonderful lamp in a cave in the middle of China, the possession of which would make him the most powerful being in the universe, if he could succeed in laying hands on it. But it was absolutely necessary that another person should go down to take it, and then put it into his hands. For this reason he had addressed himself to Aladdin, who seemed to be an artless youth, well adapted to perform the service. And he resolved, as soon as he had got the lamp from the boy, to sacrifice him so that no witness might exist who could say he was in possession of the lamp. But the event disappointed his hopes and expectations, for he was in such haste to sacrifice poor Aladdin that he defeated his own object. When the magician found all his hopes and expectations frustrated, there remained but one thing to do, and that was to return to Africa, his native country. And this he did the very same day. It might be supposed that Aladdin was now hopelessly lost. Indeed, the magician himself, who thought he had destroyed the boy, had quite forgotten the ring he had placed on his finger. But Aladdin, who, so far, knew not the wonderful qualities of either the ring or the lamp, was soon to be enlightened. When he found himself thus buried alive, he called aloud 1,000 times to his uncle, telling him he was ready to give up the lamp. But all his cries were useless, and, having no other means of making himself heard, he remained in darkness, bemoaning his unhappy fate. At last, he descended the steps and groped along the walls to the right and left several times, but could not discover the smallest opening. Finally, he sat down on the steps of his dungeon, without the least hope that he would ever again see the light of day. Aladdin remained 2 days in this hopeless state. Then, regarding his death as certain, he lifted his hands, and joining them as in the act of prayer, wholly resigned himself to the will of heaven. In this act of joining his hands, he happened to rub the ring which the magician had put upon his finger. Instantly, a genie of enormous stature and a most horrid countenance rose, as it were, out of the earth before him. This genie was so tall that his head touched the vaulted roof. And he said to Aladdin, "What dost thou command? I am ready to obey thee as thy slave, and the slave of all who have the ring that is on thy finger." On any other occasion, Aladdin would have been struck dumb with terror at the sight of this startling figure. But he was so taken up with the danger and peril of his situation that he answered without hesitation, "Whoever you are, take me, if you can, out of this place." He had scarcely said the words when the earth opened, and he found himself outside the cave, at the very spot to which the magician had brought him. Looking round, he descried the city in the distance. But he was so faint and weak, it was only with great difficulty that he got home. His mother, who already mourned him as lost or dead, was overcome by joy at the sight of him. But Aladdin begged for food, which he had the sense to eat slowly, while he drank with equal moderation. When he had done, he related to his mother all that had happened. He took the lamp out of his bosom and showed it to her, as well as the transparent and many-colored fruits that he had gathered as he returned. Aladdin had no sooner concluded the recital of his adventures than his mother began to abuse the pretended uncle in the strongest terms. She called him a traitor, an assassin, and all the other names she could think of, embracing her son and giving thanks for his deliverance. Aladdin slept profoundly all night, and, on rising, asked for breakfast. "Alas, my son," replied his mother, "I have not a morsel of bread to give you. Last night you finished all there was in the house. But have patience. I have here a little cotton I have spun. I will go and sell it and purchase something for our dinner." "Keep that for another time," said Aladdin, "and give me the lamp I brought yesterday. I will go and sell that. The money it will bring will serve us for breakfast and dinner too, nay, perhaps also for supper." Aladdin's mother took the lamp from the place where she had placed it. "It seems to me to be very dirty," she said. "If I were to clean it a little, perhaps it might sell for more." She then took some water and a little fine sand to clean the lamp. But she had scarcely begun to rub when a hideous and gigantic genie rose out of the ground before her, and cried with a great voice as loud as thunder, "What are thy commands? I am ready to obey thee as thy slave." The poor woman was so alarmed at this frightful apparition that she fell down in a fainting fit. But Aladdin had seen a similar appearance in the cavern. Consequently, he did not lose his presence of mind, but seized the lamp and answered firmly, "Bring me something to eat." The genie disappeared, returning a moment after with a large silver basin, which he carried on his head, and 12 covered dishes of the same material, filled with the choicest meats, together with 6 loaves, 2 bottles of the most excellent wine, and some silver plates and cups. He placed all these things upon the ground and instantly vanished. All this had occurred so quickly that Aladdin's mother had hardly recovered from her fainting fit before the genie had disappeared the second time. On coming to her senses, she was astonished to see the large basin, the 12 dishes, the 6 loaves, the 2 bottles of wine, and other articles. "Oh, my son," she cried, "how came this abundance here?" "My good mother," replied Aladdin, "come, sit down and eat. I will tell you everything when we have broken our fast." When they had made an end of their meal, and Aladdin's mother had taken away the things, and put aside what had not been consumed, she came and seated herself near her son. "Why?" she asked. "Did the terrible being not rather address himself to you, to whom he had before appeared in the underground cavern?" "Mother," replied Aladdin, "the genie who appeared just now to you is not the one who appeared to me. The genie who came to you was the slave of the lamp." "What?" cried his mother. "Was your lamp the reason why this terrible being addressed himself to me rather than to you? Then take it out of my sight. Indeed, I would rather you should throw away or sell it than that I should run the risk of being killed with fright by again touching it. And if you will follow my advice, you will put away the ring as well." "With your permission, my dear mother," replied Aladdin, "I shall beware of parting with this lamp. Since chance has discovered its virtues to us, let us avail ourselves of them. But we must be careful not to make any parade of our new riches, lest we draw upon ourselves the envy of our neighbors. I will take the lamp out of your sight, and I will put it where I shall be able to find it whenever I have occasion for it. Again, I cannot make up my mind to throw away the ring, but for which you would never have seen me again." Aladdin's mother had no further objections to make. The following morning, Aladdin took one of the silver plates and went out early in order to sell it. He addressed himself to a Jew he happened to meet, and, taking him aside, showed him the plate and asked if he would buy it. The Jew, a clever and cunning man, took the plate and examined it. Directly he had satisfied himself that it was good silver, he took out his purse, a piece of gold, which was exactly 1/72nd part of the value of the plate, and offered it to Aladdin, who accepted it eagerly. He and his mother continued to live quietly and economically till Aladdin had sold all the 12 dishes, one after the other. When the money for the last plate was spent, Aladdin took the basin, which was at least 10 times as heavy as any of the plates. For this the Jew counted out 10 pieces of gold, with which Aladdin was satisfied. When his 10 pieces of gold were spent, Aladdin had recourse to the lamp. He took it and rubbed it, and the genie whom he had before seen instantly appeared. But as Aladdin had rubbed the lamp more gently than his mother had done, the genie spoke to him in a softened tone. "What are thy commands?" said he. "I am hungry," cried Aladdin. "Bring me something to eat." The genie disappeared, and in a short time returned, loaded as before, and again vanished. When Aladdin again found his provisions gone, he took one of the new silver dishes and went to look for the Jew who had bought the others from him. As he walked along, he happened to pass the shop of a goldsmith, a respectable and honest old man, who called him into the shop. "My son," said he, "I have often seen you pass this way, loaded as you are now, and each time you have spoken to a certain Jew. and then I have seen you go back empty-handed. Perhaps you do not know that this Jew is a great cheat, and that no one who knows him will have any dealings with him. Now, if you will show me what you are carrying, and you wish to sell it, I will faithfully give you what it is worth, if it be in my way of business." Aladdin was only too pleased to agree to this, whereupon the old man, who knew at a glance that the plate was of the finest silver, took his scales, weighed the dish, and declared it to be worth 72 pieces of gold, which he immediately counted out. Aladdin thanked the goldsmith, and for the future carried his dishes to no one else. Although Aladdin and his mother had an inexhaustible source of money in their lamp, they continued to live with the same frugality they had always shown. Thus, mother and son passed their time happily together for several years, with the profitable assistance Aladdin occasionally procured from the lamp. During this interval, Aladdin made acquaintance with some of the most considerable merchants of the town, and gradually acquired the style and manners of the company he kept. By frequenting the jewelers' shops, he also learnt that the fruits he had gathered in the garden, and had taken to be only colored glass, were jewels of enormous price. One day, as he was walking abroad, Aladdin heard the crier reading a proclamation of the Sultan, ordering all persons to shut up their shops and retire into their houses until his daughter, the Princess Badrulbadour, a name which means the full moon among full moons, had passed on her way to the bath and had returned to the palace. Hearing this order created in Aladdin a curiosity to see the princess. So he went and hid behind the door of the bath. He had not waited long before the princess made her appearance, accompanied by a great crowd of women and servants. When she had come within 3 or 4 paces of the door, she lifted the veil which had concealed her face, and thus gave Aladdin the opportunity he desired. Till this moment, Aladdin had never seen any woman without her veil, except his mother, who was rather old, and who, even in her youth, had not possessed any beauty. The appearance of the princess dispelled the notion he had entertained that all women resembled his mother. She was, in fact, the most exquisite and charming creature imaginable, and it is not surprising that he was absolutely entranced by such loveliness. When he came home, Aladdin was unable to conceal his state of mind from the observation of his mother. She asked if anything had happened to him, or if he were unwell. He gave her no answer whatever, but continued to brood upon the lovely image of the Princess Badrulbudour. Aladdin passed a wakeful night, and the next morning he said to his mother, "You may not have heard that the Princess Badrulbudour, the daughter of our Sultan, went to the bath after dinner yesterday. I had the supreme happiness and satisfaction of seeing her. And this, my dear mother, is the true cause of the state you saw me in yesterday, and the reason of the silence I have hitherto kept. I feel such a violent affection for this princess that I can never know a moment's happiness until she is my wife." Aladdin's mother listened with great attention till he came to the last sentence, when she burst into a fit of laughter. "Alas, my son," she cried, "you must surely have lost your senses to talk thus." "Dear mother," replied Aladdin, "I foresaw very well that you would reproach me with folly and madness. but nothing will prevent me from again declaring my resolution to demand the Princess Badroulbadour of the Sultan in marriage." "In truth, my son," replied his mother, very seriously, "you seem to have forgotten who you are, and even if you are determined, I do not know who will have the boldness to carry your message to the Sultan." "You, yourself, must do that," he answered. "I?" cried his mother in amazement. "I go to the Sultan? Not I, indeed. Nothing shall induce me to engage in such an act of folly." "My dear mother," replied Aladdin, "neither your reasons nor your remonstrances will in the least change my resolution. I have told you that I intend to demand the Princess Badroulbadour in marriage, and that you must impart my wish to the Sultan. I beg you not to refuse me this favor." "My dear son," she replied, "I am your mother, and I am ready to do anything that is reasonable. But you, regardless of the lowness of your birth, demand nothing less than the daughter of your sovereign. Now, suppose I have the impudence to present myself before his majesty and make such a request. Do you not see that I should be treated as a madwoman? And there is another reason, my son. No one ever appears before the Sultan without offering him some present when a favor is sought at his hands. What present have you to offer?" Aladdin listened with the greatest patience and answered, "You say it is not customary to request an audience of the Sultan without carrying a present in your hand. I agree with you. But when you tell me I have nothing worthy of his acceptance, you forget those things we thought were pieces of colored glass. I know their value better now, and can inform you that they are precious stones of priceless worth, and worthy of the acceptance of a great sovereign." In the end, Aladdin's mother gave way to her son's arguments, and early the next day, a selection of the jewels having been made and arranged in a porcelain dish, which was then wrapped in a fine linen cloth, she took to the road towards the palace of the Sultan. But, though she succeeded in gaining admission with the rest of the crowd to the hall of audience, where the monarch in person heard petitions and administered justice, she returned home, much to Aladdin's disappointment, without having ventured to approach the Sultan. For several days in succession did the good woman resort to the palace, bearing her offering of jewels, without finding any opportunity of carrying out her mission. On the 6th day, however, the Sultan, on retiring to his apartment, said to the Grand Vizier, "For some time past, I have observed a certain woman who comes regularly every day when I hold my council, and who carries something in her hand wrapped in a linen cloth. The next day the council sits. If she returns, do not fail to call her, that I may hear what she has to say." The mother of Aladdin returned to the palace the next day the council met, and placed herself opposite the Sultan, who, touched by her patience and perseverance, said to the Grand Vizier, "Do you observe the woman I mentioned to you the other day? Order her to come here, and we will begin by hearing what she has to say." The Grand Vizier immediately pointed out the woman in question to the chief of the ushers, who signed to the mother of Aladdin to approach. She obeyed, and prostrated herself until the Sultan commanded her to rise, saying, "What is the business which brings you here day after day, my good woman?" Aladdin's mother answered, "Oh, gracious monarch, I entreat you to pardon the boldness of the request I am about to make, which is of a most private nature." The Sultan, having commanded all to withdraw but the Grand Vizier, told her she might speak, and exhorted her to tell the truth without fear. Aladdin's mother then faithfully related to the Sultan by what means Aladdin had seen the Princess Badroulbadour, and with what a violent passion the sight of the princess had inspired him, concluding by imploring his pardon for herself and her son, who had dared to dream so illustrious an alliance. The Sultan listened to this speech with the great patience. Before he returned any answer, he asked what it was she had with her, tied up in a cloth. Upon this, Aladdin's mother took up the porcelain dish, which she had set down at the foot of the throne. Removing the linen cloth, she presented the dish to the Sultan. It is impossible to express the astonishment of the monarch when he beheld in the dish such a quantity of the most precious, perfect, and brilliant jewels, greater in size and value than any he had ever seen. After admiring the jewels separately, he turned to his Grand Vizier and said, "What do you say to such a present? Is not the donor worthy of the princess, my daughter?" Now the Grand Vizier had entertained great hopes of the Sultan making a match between the princess and his own son. Therefore he replied, "Everyone must allow that this present is not unworthy of the princess. All the same, as the young man is a complete stranger, I beg your majesty to make some excuse to put off the marriage for 3 months." The Sultan, who was an easygoing monarch, agreed to this. "Return home," he said to Aladdin's mother, "and tell your son that I consent to the proposal he has made through you. But the preparations for my daughter's marriage will take 3 months. At the end of that time you may return." As soon as Aladdin saw his mother's face, he knew that she had good tidings. And when she had told him all, he thought himself the happiest and most fortunate of mortals. Though the 3 months would seem like 3 years, he declared. It happened one evening, when about 2 months of the time had gone, that Aladdin's mother found she had no oil in the house. Accordingly, she went out to see if she could get some, and on going into the city perceived signs of great festivity and rejoicing. All the shops, instead of being shut, were open, and ornamented with green branches and other decorations, and preparations were evidently being made by an illumination. Aladdin's mother asked the oil merchant what it all meant. "Where do you come from, good woman?" said he, "that you do not know that the son of the Grand Vizier is this evening to be married to the Princess Badroulbadour?" Aladdin's mother did not wait to hear more, but returned home with all possible speed. "All is lost, my son," she exclaimed. "This very evening the son of the Grand Vizier is to marry the Princess Badroulbadour at the palace." This news came upon Aladdin like a thunderclap. Then he bethought himself of the lamp, and, retiring to his room, he took it from its hiding place and rubbed it. The genie instantly appeared. "What are thy commands?" said he to Aladdin. "Attend to me," answered Aladdin. "I have now a business of great importance for you to undertake. The Sultan promised me the hand of his daughter, but he has, instead, given her in marriage to the son of his Grand Vizier. What I order you to do is this. As soon as the bride and bridegroom have retired to rest, take them up and instantly bring them both here." "Oh, master," replied the genie, "I will obey thee," and immediately disappeared. In the meantime, every preparation was made in the Sultan's palace to celebrate the nuptials of the princess, and the whole evening was spent in ceremonies and rejoicings until the time came for retiring. But the bridegroom had scarcely laid his head upon the pillow when the faithful slave of the lamp took up the bed with the bride and bridegroom in it, and, to the great astonishment of them both, in an instant transported them to Aladdin's chamber, where he set them down. Aladdin then ordered him to take the bridegroom and shut him up in the lumber room, and to return at daybreak. The genie obeyed. He also improved on Aladdin's orders by breathing on the unfortunate young man and rendering him incapable of movement. Then Aladdin addressed himself to the princess, explaining that what he had done was simply to prevent the Sultan from marrying his daughter to another after he had promised her to Aladdin. But the princess was so alarmed at this extraordinary adventure that Aladdin could not get a word out of her. So he laid himself down in the place of the Grand Vizier's son, with his back turned towards the princess, having first placed a drawn saber between the lady and himself. Punctually next morning, the genie appeared and, releasing the bridegroom from his uncomfortable position, carried him and the bride back to the palace, the genie in all these operations being visible only to Aladdin. Both the Sultan and the Sultana visited their daughter in the course of the morning, and were surprised to find her looking very upset. To the inquiries of the former, she would answer nothing, but to her mother the princess related how, on the previous night, the bed had taken up and transported into an ill-furnished and dismal chamber, where she was separated from her husband, whose place was then taken by a complete stranger, and that, when morning approached, her husband was restored to her, and they were both brought back again to the palace in a single instant. The Sultana listened with great attention, but she could not give credit to her daughter's story. "You have done well, my child," she said to the princess, "not to inform the Sultan, your father, of this matter. Take care that you mention it to no one, unless you wish to be considered a mad woman." She then ordered the son of the Grand Vizier to be called, in order to question him about what the princess had told her. But the young man felt himself so highly honored by this alliance with the Sultan that he pretended to be unaware that anything unusual had happened. The next night, at the same time, Aladdin again summoned the genie, with the result that the bride and bridegroom were again whisked off, and everything happened precisely as before. But this repetition of her amazing experience so terrified the princess that this time she herself informed the Sultan of all that had happened. The Sultan sympathized fully with the distress this surprising adventure must have excited in his daughter's mind. "My child," said he, "you were wrong not to divulge to me yesterday the strange story you have just related. I have not bestowed you in marriage to render you unhappy. Banish from your memory, then, what you have been telling me. I will take care that you shall experience no more such nights as those which you have suffered." He sent then for the Grand Vizier, whose son had also related his alarming and uncomfortable experiences, and who now informed his father that, in spite of the honor he derived from his exalted alliance with the daughter of the sovereign, he would rather die than have to undergo any more adventures of the kind. Consequently, when the Sultan spoke to the Grand Vizier of annulling the marriage, he made no objection, and this was accordingly done. Aladdin, though overjoyed, was not surprised when the news reached him. He allowed the remainder of the 3 months to elapse, and then again sent his mother to the palace to put the Sultan in mind of his promise. This time she was bolder, and, advancing to the foot of the throne, without hesitation, prostrated herself in the usual manner. After she had risen, the Sultan asked her what she wished. "O mighty monarch," she replied, "I again present myself before the throne of your majesty to announce to you, in the name of my son Aladdin, that the 3 months during which you desired him to wait have expired." When, on the former occasion, the Sultan had desired a delay of 3 months before he ascended to the request of this good woman, he thought he would hear no more of a marriage which appeared to him entirely unsuited to the princess, for he naturally judged of the suitor's position from the humble appearance of Aladdin's mother. He therefore consulted in a low tone with the Grand Vizier, who said, "It seems to me that there is a very easy method to avoid this unequal marriage. It is to set so high a price upon the princess, your daughter, that all this suitor's riches, however great they may be, cannot provide it." The Sultan approved of this advice, and, after some little reflection, said to Aladdin's mother, "Good woman, I am ready to render your son happy by uniting him to the princess, my daughter. But, as I cannot bestow her in marriage till I have seen proofs that she will be well provided for, tell your son that I will fulfill my promise as soon as he sends me 40 large basins of missive gold, full of jewels like those you have already presented from him. These basins must be carried by 40 black slaves, each of whom shall be accompanied by a white slave, young, handsome, and richly dressed. Go, my good woman, and I will wait his answer." Aladdin's mother again prostrated herself at the foot of the throne, and returned home, where she gave her son an exact account of everything the Sultan had said, and of the conditions upon which he consented to the marriage. Aladdin replied, "What he requires of me is a trifle in comparison with what I would give to possess such a treasure as the princess. Will you go and prepare dinner, and leave me a while to myself?" As soon as his mother had gone, Aladdin took the lamp and rubbed it. The genie instantly appeared, and demanded to know what was required of him. "The Sultan agrees to give me the princess, his daughter, in marriage," said Aladdin, "but he demands of me 40 large basins of massive gold, filled with jewels. He requires also that these 40 basins should be brought to him by 40 black slaves, accompanied by an equal number of young and handsome white slaves, richly dressed. Go and procure me all this as soon as possible." In a short time, the genie returned with 40 black slaves, each carrying upon his head a large golden basin of great weight. full of pearls, diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. They were accompanied by 40 white slaves. On Aladdin expressing his satisfaction, the genie disappeared. Aladdin's mother now returned from market, and great was her surprise at the sight which met her eyes. But before she could speak, she was told she must at once return to the palace and deliver to the Sultan the dowry he had demanded. As this marvelous procession of black and white slaves, all gorgeously arrayed and laden with jewels, and followed by the mother of Aladdin, passed through the streets, the people came running from all sides. On the arrival of the slaves at the palace, the porters bowed to the ground, thinking they must be the retinue of some great prince. The Sultan, informed of what was happening, ordered the doors to be thrown open, and the whole party, prostrating themselves in a semicircle, placed the jewels on the ground at the foot of the throne, while the mother of Aladdin thus addressed the monarch: "O mighty ruler, my son Aladdin is well aware that the present he has sent your majesty is much beneath the inestimable worth of the Princess Badroulbadour. He, nevertheless, hopes that your majesty will graciously accept it, and that it may find favor in the eyes of the princess." The Sultan hesitated no longer. The mere sight of such immense riches and the wonderful speed with which Aladdin had fulfilled his exorbitant request, without making the least difficulty, persuaded him that Aladdin must be a desirable son-in-law. "Go, my good woman," he said, his eyes fixed greedily upon his splendor, "and tell your son I am waiting with open arms to receive and embrace him, and that the greater diligence he uses in coming to receive from my hands the gift I am ready to bestow upon him, in the person of my daughter, the greater pleasure he will afford me." The mother of Aladdin returned home swelling with pride and happiness. "You have every reason, my dear son," she said, "to be satisfied. The Sultan has announced that you are worthy to possess the Princess Badroulbadour, and he is now awaiting to embrace you and to conclude the marriage." Aladdin was delighted at this intelligence, and instantly retired to his chamber. He then took up the lamp, rubbed it, and immediately the genie showed his obedience to its power by appearing in readiness to execute his commands. "O genie," said Aladdin to him, "I now desire thee to provide me with a richer and more magnificent dress than was ever worn by any monarch." This was a very simple matter for the genie, and the dress in which he now assisted Aladdin to array himself was so dazzling that it made the eyes of the beholder ache. He also provided him with a horse with jeweled harness and saddle, and 40 more slaves, in addition to 10,000 pieces of gold to distribute to the crowd. Aladdin's mother was not forgotten, for her dutiful son presented her with 6 magnificent dresses and as many female attendants. Aladdin then mounted his horse and began his triumphal progress through the streets, scattering handfuls of gold among the throng which pressed around him. So he came to the palace, where the Sultan was so favorably impressed and agreeably surprised by his first sight of his new and unknown son-in-law, that he descended 3 steps of his throne to prevent Aladdin from throwing himself at his feet, and embraced him with the most evident marks of affection. After some polite speeches had passed between them, the Sultan conducted Aladdin to a magnificent saloon, where a great feast had been prepared. The Sultan and Aladdin sat together, waited upon by the Grand Vizier and the nobles of the court, after which the Sultan ordered the chief judge to attend, and commanded him to draw up a contract of marriage between the Princess Badroulbadour and Aladdin. When the judge had drawn up the contract with all the requisite forms, the Sultan asked Aladdin if he wished to remain in the palace and to conclude the ceremonies that day. "O mighty monarch," he replied, "I request you to permit me to defer my happiness until I have built a palace for the princess that shall be worthy even of her merit and dignity. And I entreat your majesty to have the goodness to point out a suitable situation. I will then neglect nothing to get it finished with all possible diligence." "My son," answered the Sultan, "there is a large open space in front of my palace which I shall be delighted to let you have for the purpose." The young man then took leave of the Sultan and returned home in the same order in which he had come, receiving acclamations from the people, who wished him all happiness and prosperity. Retiring to his room, he instantly rubbed the lamp and summoned the genie. "O genie," said Aladdin, "I have hitherto had every reason to praise the precision and promptitude with which thou hast executed whatever I have required. I now command thee to build me a palace as quickly as possible, opposite to that belonging of the Sultan, and at a short distance from it. And let this palace be in every way worthy to receive the Princess Badroulbadour, my bride. I leave the choice of the materials and the design to thee. But on the top floor let there be a large chamber with 4 walls of gold and silver, and let there be 6 windows in each wall, 23 of which have their frames set with jewels of the first water. I wish this palace to have a large court in the front, another at the back, and a garden. Above all, be sure that there is a room well filled with money, both gold and silver. Stables I must likewise have, filled with the most beautiful horses. Also grooms and attendants, and female slaves for the service of the princess. Go, and return as soon as thy task is completed." The sun had already gone down when Aladdin had finished giving his orders to the genie respecting the construction of the palace. The very next morning, when day broke, Aladdin had scarcely risen before the genie presented himself. "O master," said he, "thy palace is finished. Come and see if it is to thy liking." The genie transported him there in an instant, and when Aladdin had examined the whole palace, which exceeded his utmost expectations, and had seen all the riches and magnificence it contained, he exclaimed, "O genie, no one can be more satisfied than I. There is one thing only which I did not mention to thee. It is to have a carpet of the finest velvet laid from the gate of the Sultan's palace to the door of the apartment which is reserved for the princess." "I will return in an instant," replied the genie, and he had not been gone a moment before Aladdin saw the carpet he had ordered rolled out by invisible hands. The genie then carried Aladdin back to his own house. The Sultan's porters, who had come to open the gates, and who were accustomed to see an open space where Aladdin's palace now stood, were much astonished at observing that space occupied by a new and magnificent building. and at seeing a lovely velvet carpet which seemed to stretch from its gateway to that of the Sultan's abode. The news of this wonder soon spread through the palace, and the Grand Vizier was no less astonished than were the rest. The first thing he did was to go to the Sultan, but he tried to represent the whole business as enchantment. The Sultan, however, replied, "After the display of riches we have seen, can you think it so extraordinary that my son-in-law should be able to build a palace in this short time?" He wished, no doubt, to surprise us, and we every day see what miracles riches can perform. When Aladdin had returned home and dismissed the genie, he found that his mother was up, and had begun to put on one of the magnificent dresses he had ordered for her the day before, and in which she admired herself immensely. When her toilet was completed, she proceeded to the palace in order to wait upon her new daughter-in-law. Aladdin then mounted his horse and left his paternal house, never more to return, but he did not forget to take with him his wonderful lamp, which had been the cause of all his happiness and prosperity. Aladdin's mother was received with great honor, and was taken by the chief steward to the apartment of the Princess Badroulbadour, who ran and embraced her, and made her sit upon her own couch. The Sultan also paid her great honor and respect, being much struck, after her former humble appearance, at finding her as magnificently attired as the princess, his daughter. When evening approached, the princess took leave of the Sultan, her father, and began her progress to her new dwelling, with Aladdin's mother on her left hand, followed by 100 female slaves, all magnificently dressed, and accompanied by bands of music and 400 pages carrying torches. In this order did the princess proceed, walking upon the carpet which extended from Aladdin's palace to that of the Sultan, until she arrived at her destination, where Aladdin ran, with every expression of joy, to welcome her. "Oh, adorable princess," he cried, "if I should have had the misfortune to displease you by my boldness in aspiring to an alliance with the daughter of my Sultan, please to consider that it was to your beautiful eyes and to your charms alone that you must attribute my rashness." "Oh, Prince, for thus I must now call you," replied the princess, "I obey the will of the Sultan, my father. And now that I have seen you, I freely own that I obey him without reluctance." Aladdin was delighted at this charming answer. He kissed the princess's hand, and then conducted her into a large saloon, where there was a table spread with everything rare and delicious, and where all the dishes, cups, and other articles were of solid gold. The Princess Badroulbadour, Aladdin, and his mother sat down to table, where, as they feasted, they were entertained by a concert provided by invisible performers, arranged by the genie. It was nearly midnight when, according to the custom at that time observed in China, Aladdin arose and presented his hand to the Princess Badroulbadour, that they might dance together, and thus finish the ceremony of their nuptials. The next morning, Aladdin went to his father-in-law's palace and begged him to do him the honor of taking breakfast with him. The Sultan readily granted this request, as he was anxious to see the inside of the palace of Aladdin. He was much struck by the beauty of the exterior, but his expressions of surprise and pleasure grew louder and higher as he passed from room to room. When he came to the chamber with the 23 jeweled casements, he was so much astonished that he stood absolutely still. "Nowhere," he exclaimed, "will anything be found to equal this. This palace is one of the wonders of the world. There is, however, one thing at which I am astonished, and that is to observe that one of the windows is unfinished. Is it through forgetfulness or neglect, or because the workmen have not had time to put the finishing strokes to this beautiful specimen of architecture?" "My lord," answered Aladdin, "it is left unfinished on purpose, as I wish your majesty to put the finishing stroke to the palace, that I may thus have a memento of the favor I have received from you." "If you have left it with that view," replied the Sultan, "I will give the necessary orders with the greatest pleasure." Aladdin then conducted him to the chamber where he had entertained the Princess Badroulbadour on the previous evening, and where 2 tables were set in the most magnificent manner. The Sultan sat at the first table and ate with his daughter, Aladdin, and the Grand Vizier, while the rest of the court officials were regaled at the second table. Now, although Aladdin had requested the Sultan to complete the 24th window in the gold and silver chamber, he knew that he would be unable to make it match the others. And it was so, for, though the Sultan summoned the chief jewelers and goldsmiths in the kingdom, and furnished them with the finest of the jewels, they were only able to finish about half of it. Aladdin, therefore, not only made them stop working, but even undo all they had done and carry back the jewels to the Sultan. Then he took out his lamp, rubbed it, and ordered the genie to complete the work. This the genie did in the twinkling of an eye, so that when the Sultan, who had been much surprised at the report of the goldsmiths and jewelers, and the return of his jewels, came to inquire into the matter, he was still more amazed to find the work done. "My dear son," he cried in astonishment, "what a man you are! Who can do such wonderful things almost instantly? There is not your equal in the world." As time went on, Aladdin, by all his kindness, courtesy, and generosity, became beloved by all who came in contact with him. And so several happy years passed quickly by. And now it is time to refer to one who, it may be thought, has passed right out of the story, and that is the magician. For some years he had remained in the belief that Aladdin had perished in the cavern in which he had imprisoned him. But about this time it occurred to him to make certain. When, by means of his magic, he discovered that Aladdin was not only alive, but living in honor and splendor, he was greatly enraged, especially as he had no doubt that Aladdin owed all his good fortune to the lamp. Therefore, the very next day he started for China, with the intention of revenging himself. He arrived at the city where Aladdin lived, and was soon in possession of most of the facts which have been related. He visited and inspected the wonderful palace, and, filled with fury at this evidence of the fortune and greatness of Aladdin, he determined at all hazards to obtain possession of the lamp which had wrought these wonders. His first object was to discover its whereabouts. His magic art soon informed him that the lamp was in Aladdin's palace, and his joy was so great on learning this that he could hardly contain himself. I shall get this lamp, he cried, and then I will fling the fellow back into that obscurity and poverty from which he has taken so high a leap. It happened, most unfortunately for Aladdin, that just at this time he was absent on a hunting expedition, which was to last several days. As soon as the magician had discovered this, he went to the shop of a man who made and sold lamps. I want, said he, 12 copper lamps. The man replied that he had not so many in his shop, but if his customer would wait till the next day, he would have them ready for him, very well polished. The next morning the magician received the 12 lamps. He put them in a basket he had provided for the purpose, and went with this on his arm to the neighborhood of Aladdin's palace. Here he walked to and fro, crying with a loud voice, "Who will exchange old lamps for new ones?" All who passed laughed at his apparent folly. "That man," said they, "must surely have lost his senses to offer to exchange new lamps for old." The magician was not surprised at the ridicule with which he was assailed. He seemed only intent on disposing of his merchandise, and continued to cry, "Who will exchange old lamps for new?" He repeated this so often as he walked to and fro on all sides of the palace that at last the Princess Badroulbadour heard his voice and sent one of her slaves to find out the reason of the noise and bustle. The slave presently returned, laughing heartily. "Oh, Princess," she said, "there is a fool outside with a basket on his arm, full of beautiful new lamps, which he will not sell, but offers to exchange for old ones." Another of the female slaves hereupon said, "There is an old lamp on a shelf in one of the chambers, which seems to belong to no one. If the princess will give me leave, I will try whether this fellow is really fool enough to give me a new lamp for an old one." The princess, who unfortunately was ignorant of the value of the lamp, which Aladdin usually kept locked up, consented, and sent the slave who, beckoning to the magician, said, "Give me a new lamp for this." The magician at once guessed that this was the very lamp he was seeking. He eagerly took it and bade the slave choose which of the new ones she would have. She selected the brightest and biggest and carried it to the princess in triumph. The magician, having now no further use for his load of lamps, left his basket in the by-street and made haste to find a retired spot outside the city. He then drew the lamp from his bosom and rubbed it. The genie instantly obeyed the summons. "What are thy commands?" cried the genie. "I command you," replied the magician, "instantly to take the palace which you have erected in this city and transport it, and me also, into Africa." When the Sultan, on rising the next morning, looked out of the window and saw only an open space where the palace of Aladdin had stood, he thought at first he was dreaming, and rubbed his eyes. "I cannot be deceived," he said to himself. "It was in this very place that I beheld it. If it had fallen, the materials would lie strewn around, and if the earth had swallowed it, we should still see some signs of disturbance." He sent in haste for the Grand Vizier. "Look out of your window," said the Sultan on his arrival, "and tell me if you can see Aladdin's palace." The Grand Vizier was as much amazed as the Sultan had been. When he was quite sure the palace of Aladdin had disappeared, he said, "Your Majesty, may remember that I declared, first of all, that this palace was the work of magic. The Sultan, who could not deny this, was the more angry with Aladdin. "Where is this impostor, this wretch?" he exclaimed, "that I may strike off his head. Go and order 30 of my horsemen to bring him before me in chains." The horsemen set out and met Aladdin, who was returning from the chase, about 5 or 6 leagues from the city. "Prince Aladdin," said the officer in command, "it is with the greatest regret that I must inform you that we are sent to arrest you. We entreat you not to be angry with us for doing our duty." This declaration astonished Aladdin beyond measure. He felt himself innocent, and asked the officer if he knew of what crime he was accused. But the officer replied that neither he nor his men could give him any information. Thereupon Aladdin dismounted and said, "I submit. Execute whatever orders you have received." When the guards entered the suburbs, all the people who saw Aladdin led in chains like a criminal felt sure he was going to lose his head. As he was generally beloved, some seized sabers, others whatever arms they could find, and those who had no weapons whatever took up stones and tumultuously followed the guards. Thus Aladdin was brought before the Sultan, who commanded the executioner to strike off his head. But at that critical instant, the Grand Vizier called the Sultan's attention to the fact that a great crowd had overcome the guards and were preparing to storm the palace. The Sultan was so alarmed at this that he ordered the executioner to sheath his saber, to take the bandage off Aladdin's eyes, and set him at liberty. When Aladdin found himself free, he raised his hands in supplication and entreated the Sultan to tell him for what crime he had just pardoned him. "Thy crime, perfidious wretch!" exclaimed the Sultan. "Follow me, and I will show thee." He led Aladdin to a window. "You know where your palace stood?" he said. "Look around and tell me what has become of it." Aladdin looked, but saw nothing except the space which his palace had lately occupied. "O mighty king," replied Aladdin, "I see it has disappeared, but I can assure your majesty that I had no share whatever in removing it." "I care not what has become of your palace," replied the Sultan. "I esteem my daughter 1,000,000 times beyond that, and unless you discover and bring her back to me, be assured your head shall answer for it." "Great king," said Aladdin, "I entreat your majesty to grant me 40 days to make the most diligent inquiries. If I do not, within that period, succeed in my search, I will lay my head at the foot of your throne, that you may dispose of me according to your pleasure." "I grant your request," answered the Sultan. Aladdin left the Sultan's presence in the deepest distress. For 3 days he roamed about the city, eating only what was given him in charity, and unable to come to any decision. At length, as he could not bear to remain longer in a place where he had lived in such splendor, he bent his steps towards the country. He came towards the close of the day to the bank of a river. "Whither shall I go to seek my palace?" he murmured to himself. "In what part of the world shall I find either my dwelling or my dear princess?" The bank was steep and slippery, and as he spoke he slipped. Happy was it for him that he still had on his finger the ring the magician had given him. For, in grasping a projecting stone to save himself, he rubbed the ring, and the same genie instantly appeared whom he had seen before in the underground cavern. "What are thy commands?" cried the genie. Aladdin was most agreeably surprised by the sight of this unexpected help. He instantly replied, "Save my life, genie, a second time, by transporting me to the spot where my palace is, and placing me under the window of the Princess Badroulbadour." So soon as he said the words, the genie took him up and transported him to Africa, in the neighborhood of a great city, in the midst of a large meadow in which the palace now stood. He set him down directly under the window of the princess, and there left him. As it was then night, Aladdin lay down under a tree to wait for daylight. Being now full of hope, he soon fell asleep. The Princess Badroulbadour rose next morning, which earlier than she had done since she had been transported to Africa by the artifice of the magician, whose hated presence she was compelled to endure once every day. When she was dressed, one of the women, looking through the lattice, perceived Aladdin, who was gazing up, and instantly ran to tell her mistress the glad news. The princess, who could scarcely believe the fact, immediately went to the window and herself saw him. She opened the lattice, and Aladdin greeted her with the greatest joy. "Lose not a moment," cried the princess. "They have gone to open the secret door." This secret door was directly below the apartment of the princess. Aladdin entered, and in another instant all their troubles were forgotten in the joy of meeting. At length Aladdin said, "Before you speak of anything else, my princess, tell me what has become of that old lamp which I left upon a shelf before I went hunting." "Alas, my dear husband," replied the princess, "I greatly fear our misfortunes are connected with that lamp. And what distresses me is that it was I who meddled with it." She then gave Aladdin an account of all that had happened relative to the exchange of the old lamp for a new one. Then she told how, on the following night, she had felt the palace flying through the air. "O princess," replied Aladdin, interrupting her, as she was again blaming herself for all that had occurred, "the fault was mine for not having left the lamp in security. But tell me, if you can, where he keeps it." "He constantly carries it in his bosom," replied the princess. "I am sure of this, because he once took it out in my presence, showing it as a sort of trophy when he was trying to persuade me to be faithless to you and to take him for my husband. But he never had any answer from me save disdain." "My princess," interrupted Aladdin, "I trust I have discovered the means of delivering you. For this purpose, however, I must go into the town. Watch for my return." Aladdin took the road that led to the town, and when he got there, he went into a lane appropriated to druggists. Entering the best shop, he asked the owner if he could sell him a certain powder. The merchant replied that he kept it, but that it was very dear. Aladdin therefore took out his purse and purchased half a dram for a piece of gold. Returning to the palace, where the secret door was opened instantly, he informed the princess of the plan he had arranged for her deliverance. "You must," he said, "attire yourself in one of your finest dresses, and when the magician pays you a visit, receive him with all the affability that you can assume. Give him to understand that you are making the greatest efforts to forget me, and That he may be the more convinced of your sincerity, invite him to sup with you. But tell him that you have no wine fit for the occasion. On hearing this, he will leave you to procure some. In his absence, you must put this powder into one of the cups. Then, upon first opportunity, you must fill it with wine and induce him to drink it. Scarcely will he have emptied the cup when you will see him fall backwards. The princess promised to carry out these directions, and Aladdin took his leave. As soon as he was gone, the princess made her woman dress her in the most becoming manner, and when the magician made his appearance at his usual hour, she rose to greet him, and altogether treated him with a civility she had never before shown him. When he had taken his seat, the princess looked at him with an air of kindness, which made him suppose she no longer beheld him with aversion, and then said to him, "You are doubtless surprised at the change in me. But I have been thinking matters over, and have decided that, as my father in his rage has doubtless put Aladdin to death, and as therefore an ocean of tears would be unavailing, I will shed no more, but make the best of things as they are. I, accordingly, begin by inviting you to supper, but as I have no wine worthy of the occasion, I must ask you to supply that yourself." The magician, who had never flattered himself that he should so soon and so easily acquire the good graces of the princess, hastened to accept the invitation. "I will go and bring 2 bottles and return immediately," he said. "The longer you are gone, the more impatient shall I be to see you again," replied the princess. Delighted beyond measure, the magician hastened to bring the wine, while the princess threw the powder which Aladdin had given her into a goblet and set it aside. On the magician's return, they sat down to supper, and the princess, paying every attention to her guest. Then, having given one of her women the signal to fill the wine cup she had prepared, she said, "In China, when 2 lovers drink together, they change goblets, and then drink to each other's health." With these words she presented to her companion the goblet she held, and put out her hand to receive his. The magician hastened to make the exchange, and, having drained the cup to the last drop, fell back dead. The princess then ordered one of her women to admit Aladdin, who opened the vest of the magician, took out the lamp, and rubbed it. The genie instantly presented himself, and made his usual profession of service. "O genie," said Aladdin, "I command you, in the name of this lamp, to take this palace and transport it to the same spot in China whence it was brought." The genie testified his obedience, and the journey was made immediately. Since the disappearance of Aladdin's palace and the loss of Princess Badroulbadour, whom he did not hope to see again, the Sultan had been inconsolable. Every morning, as soon as he had risen, he went to look out the window in the direction where the palace of Aladdin had stood. When, on the morning following the events just described, he found the space no longer empty, he could not believe his eyes. But when convinced that it was no delusion, his joy was so great that without waiting for his attendants, he started off and was received by Aladdin at the door of his palace. "O Aladdin," cried the Sultan, "I cannot speak to you till I have embraced my dear daughter." The princess had just finished dressing when the Sultan entered. He eagerly embraced her, while the princess, on her part, showed the greatest delight at again beholding him, and gave an exact account of all that had taken place. At the conclusion of her story, the Sultan expressed his astonishment over and over again. Then, having again embraced Aladdin and his daughter, he returned to his palace and ordered a grand festival to last 10 days to celebrate the occasion. In due course, the Sultan died, and the princess came to the throne, sharing her power with Aladdin. They were beloved by everybody and lived happily together for many years.